I'm Brent Feldman, and this is another episode of Mix and Matchbox. Today, I have with me Myke Bates, the co founder of Hearo, and we're going to be talking a little bit about his company and what he does. So, hey, Myke, how are you doing?
I'm fantastic.
That is great. Definitely thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Really, I would love to ask you kind of first and foremost, what is Hearo?
That is a good question. I find myself being entirely too long-winded when typically answering this question. The elevator pitch isn't yet perfected, which is silly for being over 3 years. So I'll do my best.
I'm
Um,
16 in and I'm still not good at it. So
yeah,
fair enough.
it's tough when a platform does so much to succinctly describe it. But we consider ourselves a remote support platform designed specifically with care agency providers in mind first. So what that means is if there's a company that provides care to individuals of varying amounts from a couple hours a day to 24 hours a day. Our platform is designed for those agencies to adopt so that they can form their own remote support team to administer monitoring and care remotely where
Cool.
that fits nicely. And that, in a nutshell, is what Hearo is.
That's awesome. And I know that you and I got a chance to like connect like a little bit before this to talk about like the origins. And it's interesting because you didn't necessarily start down this path with the intention of doing, Hero as it exists today. So, yeah, what was that sort of kind of roundabout way that you ended up coming into the company as it is now?
Yep, that story is it's a rich one, with probably more time than the podcast could hold. But the gist of it is that a buddy of mine and I started a company that was trying to tackle the issue of voice and video communication. Mind you, this is prior to COVID. This is prior really to any sort of rise from Zoom that everybody knows and just absolutely loves. Really, at the time, the best thing going was Skype. And I think you can say that word to just about anybody, and like their skin starts to crawl a little bit. And so that was kind of the idea of this company that we had started, was to make voice and video communication a heck of a lot easier, and actually started with the emphasis on voice, not even video. We were working remotely together across the country and wanted a really easy way to just strike up a dialogue really quick without having to disrupt your workflow with opening up an application, hitting the call button, whatever. Like whatever you were working on is now covered up by the Skype screen or whatever. And so we started down that route and actually had something pretty good on our hands. It garnered some interest, and we found ourselves in an accelerator program here in Springfield, Missouri, with the E Factory. And it was the first cohort they had run of this. And we were accepted into that program, and that gave us some monies. It gave us some room to operate, and we also took on investment. And it was our key investor in that equation that is the start of how the Hearo story started to come to be. He had approached us and asked, hey, I've got this idea for this void that exists in this market for, specifically these care provider agencies. There's a big trend, big push to do remote monitoring, but pretty much everything that exists out there requires that they, as an organization, then basically outsource the work because they need the technology that these companies offer, but then those companies also then provide the monitoring. And so it's just kind of a silly equation. And so, he had the idea of, this platform that he was, looking to potentially create, and thought that our product at the time could be a good add-in to fuel kind of that voice and video communication portion of it. And so that's really the start of that. And I, as I tend to do, got pretty invested quickly in that idea and slapped together, a really rough prototype, an MVP of this that was much more than just the voice and video stuff. He had explained the idea of using sensor technology and how that would be related to this. And so I kind of jumped in, slapped together this concept that also did use the voice and video communication. And the concept was interesting. It was the display of it was just a command line interface. So like that's how the thing operated. And so you'd start it up, and then it would detect something from a sensor mimicking sort of like a fall. And then it had voice capability in there. So it spoke out, looks like something might be wrong, is everything okay? And then it would listen for a voice response back from that, of listening for keywords, no, help, fall, like right, all these keywords. And if that was detected, then it would automatically spin up a voice connection to the care providing side. And so that was the prototype, and we started showing it off to some people that we believe would be interested in that. Some connections that Jim had, our investor and now co-founder of Hearo. So we started showing it off, and it got a lot of interest. Eventually led to a meeting with some heads of Department of Mental Health here in the state of Missouri. And they, kind of signaled a thumbs up. And it was at that point, a lot had transpired prior to that, but it was at that point that we had decided, if they're showing interest in it, we know we've got something on our hands here. And so that had happened. It went well. That meeting went really well. And we decided to make it a reality. And so really all of the eggs went into the Hearo basket at that point. And the rest is history, I suppose.
Yeah, that's so cool. Like kind of organically coming together in some sort of sense. But really, yeah, I guess prompted by, one of your other co-founders. But it's cool because there is, there's definitely that need, that gap in the marketplace. And it's cool that technology is able to fill it in a way. And certainly, with the aid, the help of, what you guys are able to do. At the end of the day, I guess if it's okay to say that, your product really does, it's meant to help people. It's aided by technology, but it does. But, is there a way, a long story short, sort of condensed version that you can say of like, this is really what it does. This is how our product helps people.
Yeah. So it helps people on a lot of different levels. And that's one of the really humbling things about this is not only the immediate need of these individuals, right, who need some level of care and assistance. That's obviously like our focus all the time. Even though I say that we are kind of a provider first platform, that is true. But we're always concerned about the individuals themselves. So that one is the most like profound and like the one that you feel the most, because these individuals are exist on a vast spectrum of needs. And a lot of times, especially for the ones that are well suited for this type of situation, a lot of times they don't need people, care providers in their home as often as they are. But prior to technology existing, or their market being ready for it, um, it had no other options, right? So like the only option was you either have somebody in the home or you don't. And there's no kind of in between space, and that's really what Hearo is an in between space. So picture, if you will, being in your home overnight and having somebody camped out on the couch, there to just monitor you, just because. And that's not to say that like this works for every situation, because it doesn't. But there is a very large amount of situations where this works great for. And so even just those immediate solutions we saw of, providers being able to pull out over overnight staff inside a home, the level of autonomy and independence that that brings to somebody can't be overstated. I mean, like we knew it was going to be really good, but interacting with these individuals and seeing firsthand how it just brings so much independence to them is amazing. So there's those direct, you know, individuals that are being served by this, but you can keep climbing up the ladder. So from a state standpoint, from a provider standpoint, and the state, which kind of go hand in hand, you know, there's a reality of money and you know, capacity of hiring people that is also a big part of this equation. So these companies are finding it hard to even hire enough people, and when they have enough people, you know, paying them well enough to want to hang around. There's so many things stretching the system thin, and so, you know, even though we're talking about like funding mechanisms and state stuff, at the end of the day, these are all people too, right? So making their jobs great, being able to, you know, fulfill their, you know, calling to help individuals. This provides a mechanism now for them, for their net to be cast in a much wider way than without technology. So we're making, you know, we're enriching those lives. The companies now are able to sustain a lot easier. The state's funding mechanisms now can spread farther. The families of these individuals now are made better. There's just a lot of people's lives that gets touched on this. So
That is
hopefully
really
that
cool.
answers that.
Yeah, that totally answers it. Well, and it's something that I'm sure maybe wasn't even intended, you know, when you got into it of how sprawling it may be. But you know, the fact that you know, realizing maybe one gap in the marketplace, you know, illuminates all these others. And I
Right.
think you touched on a really important one, which is, you know, privacy. And I think, you know, people are more cognizant now than they were ever of, you know, kind of like the digital overlords that, you know, we have with you know, pervasive technology monitoring, all that sort of stuff everywhere. But I think, you know, you brought up a really important point and something very real for people, to where, you know, sometimes because of this current construct, people have to deal with people inside of their home or inside of their space in lieu of some sort of technology, you know, sort of monitoring. But you know, that is a very real problem that hopefully this solves by, you know, putting technology in place. No longer does somebody have to be in that space, giving them the autonomy and freedom in which you kind of mentioned. But you know, as a whole, since it is a technology based product, you know, obviously there's this physical sense, but there's this also digital sense of privacy too. So what does kind of privacy mean to you in the aspect of like you know, considering your product?
Yeah, that you were dead on. Privacy is huge. Um, you know, you get into the space of comparing like technologies. And I think that, you know, most people are going to immediately think of, you know, like Amazon, you know, Alexa type devices and, you know, environmental sensing devices that, you know, you could very easily go pick up off the shelf at Best Buy and such. Um, I do. The audience listening to this is probably not going to bat an eye at the fact that like Amazon, the Facebooks, the Googles are a bit creepy. I mean, like we use them. We have to use them. They help run, you know, our lives as, you know, technology laden people. But at the end of the day, there is a little bit of creepiness in there, and even myself, like I don't get to the quite the tinfoil hat level of, you know, like none of that, but it is a bit weird to me. So we set out not only from that aspect, but also from the aspect of needing to have much more control and capability over these devices. We set out as being the goal of not using any of those type of technologies. Again, from the security standpoint, ugh. From a logistical standpoint, like those type of devices, you know, to even utilize them, what's the first thing you need? Well, you need a Google account or you need a Facebook account. We can't expect that, anyone has these things set up, and nor should we want them to go set up those accounts just to use, these things. So that removes, a lot of like security risks that we don't have a lot of control over.
Cool.
And so when we use our own devices, and if we haven't produced something ourselves, say from like a hardware level, we are utilizing hardware that is not phoning back home, to some other server. It's all processed locally, and therefore we have control over that, as well as the rest of our stack. So everything that we utilize, like, we have either built ourselves, or we're using a platform or system that is designed to be able to uh, use to create stuff, and is made specifically for like product development, and not so much as like some other, commodity, like use consumery type service that is made to, like Ring, right? Like,
Right.
we're not using like a Ring type technology. If we are using another service, it's designed to be integrated into something custom.
Yeah.
So
You aren't just
therefore
selling
we
it to a data broker or something,
right.
like
Yep.
offloading this data. It's everything is kind of purposefully integrated.
Yep. Yep. Exactly right.
Honestly, that is really cool, and that's good to know. Because yeah, especially as people look for the convenience of tying into some of those other services of like, oh sweet, I'll just use my Google login. Number one,
Right.
that just like you said, has the expectation of that person, that consumer, that it actually has that. And then on the second point, what are they doing with the data? Just
Yep.
because you logged in using that, okay, now are they siphoning off usage data? Are they pulling anything else that may be compromising or personally identifying? I think there's
Yep.
there's huge, even though convenience is really high for people, realizing what that does to their own personal information, where it gets used and how it should probably cause more people concern. But it's good that you guys have a mindset of controlling that as much as you can.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. So it is cool also because you're dealing with people who, are needing this sort of, care, that accessibility in, whatever way you kind of want to think about it plays into it. And for us, we're, doing web design and development. We're constantly thinking of web accessibility. How are people with who are, have potentially limited abilities on sight, on hearing, on like other sort of complications with their ability to do the things that everybody else may enjoy to do. I think that's a big thing for us, for trying to like how can we enable websites to make sure that screen readers can read them effectively, dealing with anything that we control within our abilities, as from the web accessibility standpoint. But as accessibility obviously extends beyond that, I mean, there's ADA laws and regulations for like buildings and codes and practices. What does accessibility kind of mean to you in your organization, as you are enabling, in a sense, the ability of care to be provided, but what as a whole does accessibility kind of mean to your organization?
It's kind of an interesting um kind of evolution of how accessibility rose to the level of importance in Hero as it has. Um and almost kind of sad on one sense, that like we always knew that that was going to be of importance, but as more of a in the beginning, as more of a tech minded company, more so than, say, a company that has roots and has experience in this field. We probably didn't put as much emphasis up front as we should have. And I mentioned that because it came down like a ton of bricks when we were at some early shows, like trade shows, and just demoing in the state of demoing stuff. And we started experiencing firsthand, individuals coming up with a range of disabilities, from sight to hearing. And when they're standing there, really interested in how this can work for them, and we're kind of empty handed, that was a very sobering experience. and led then directly to a bit of an obsession about how we can be serving these individuals better. And that has remained a constant, and is not anything that we don't think about anymore. And so there will always be areas where we can improve that. But we were fortunate enough to have directly experienced that, because it puts you, in obviously not nearly as a vulnerable state as they were in, but at least as close as possible to feeling that. And so that has driven a lot of, like I said, to kind of an point of obsession, where nearly every feature we're talking about, well, let's broaden that and talk about how this can serve XYZ type impairments. And that's a guiding light for us now.
Yeah, sometimes it's those tough situations that you deal with that drive you to, make a better product at the end of the day. So I feel like that's super real and helpful, for anybody here that, yeah, sometimes it's bad news that you're like, okay, we didn't consider this, and that is
Yeah.
actually true. But then, it ends up helping to make, yeah, things better, not only for, your company in general, but for absolutely the people you serve. So
Yeah.
that's super helpful. In terms of how you're kind of constructing your product, and you mentioned that there's other kind of quote unquote players in the marketplace. What would you say is the way that you're approaching things differently, maybe than your competitors?
Yeah. So, yeah, some of that kind of already mentioned. And I don't want to make it sound like we're the only company operating this way, but I can say we are one of very few. So one of the big differentiating features is focusing on providing a product for agencies. So many of the other products out there, are meant to have the tech shipped to them or installed, and then that company then provide the support. And there is space for that. Don't get me wrong, especially for smaller agencies that may not have, they don't have the capacity to create their own, call center, if you will, their own remote force, or maybe a small family, or like there is situations where that makes sense, and we're not blind to that. But the void specifically existed in solutions designed for more of an enterprise type setting. So that's certainly one of our biggest differentiators. And then kind of down from that, like I kind of touched on earlier, is just technology choices. There, I see, with many companies that they're using, more of the off the shelf type systems, which when you're providing the care, or when you're providing the monitoring, that's kind of okay to a certain extent, at least from a logistical standpoint, because you're not putting the onus on the agency to manage, deploy, and do all that stuff. So if you want to use a Ring camera for something, cool, because you're the one providing the monitoring. Like, you're probably dealing with setting up the Ring account, the password, like you are managing that. But in this enterprise setting, we cannot tell an agency, oh, make sure individual A has these Google accounts set up. Like, you may need to go set it up for them. That's a nightmare for them to manage. Like, it just doesn't work. And I think that's a big part of the reason that very few companies have a platform like we do, is because that's a lot of work to build that kind of infrastructure.
Mhm.
And there is a lot of consumer and commodity hardware out there that in truth probably works well for smaller settings. But when you're worried about, a company that employs hundreds or thousands of employees and provides care for, thousands to tens of thousands of individuals, you can't, that is unscalable. And so that's a big part of where we are different. We now give them, they don't have to worry about the tech at all. They get services with us, and they log straight into a dashboard where now they can monitor up to 16 locations or whatever the state allows. And they didn't have to worry about any of the tech. And we're there to support that entire platform. So should they have any issues, like we're there to solve that. And you're just not going to get that with, kind of like a DIY type setup, or, you're not going to get that at all with companies who you're farming the work out to. And what's funny about those situations is oftentimes, those remote monitoring services can't do much anyways, right? They can touch base, either via voice or video, but if they're not there, right, they're calling to the agency saying, hey, you need to go over to so-and-so's house. There might be something up. Why didn't they just do that themselves?
Right. It's like ADT being, not being able to call the fire department.
Right.
Yeah. It's
Yep.
like, hey, there's a problem. Cool. That's great.
Yep.
But
Yep.
how can you actually help
Exactly.
me?
Yep.
Well, with this view of kind of like not only, the market, but your product and like, maybe other products that are, kind of in the marketplace, is there anything that you feel like is maybe plaguing more rapid adoption of technology like this? Because, from my standpoint as a layperson, somebody not, directly, in it, it sounds fantastic, and it sounds like certainly from some of the other benefits you had mentioned, it relieving some of the strain and stress on these facilities that are frequently looking to hire and get more staff, more people, because they need it, and especially because of the demand on the physical presence. Is there anything though that you feel like is kind of standing in the way of yeah, people, a greater uptake of this type of technology?
Yeah, I think there's that could be, you go in several different directions with this, but I unfortunately it's the difficulty of setting up in the context of a larger organization type setup, the difficulty of setting something up like this. I think a lot of people have the perception that you can just use, off the shelf technology. And again, while that's true for limited, situations, single family type setup, when you're thinking about a larger operation, I think that there is an idea or an assumption that you can actually utilize those things, that you can go get at Best Buy and just throw them in there. And that certainly, I think, paints a lot of people's outlook on how this kind of technology can be used, because, likely what they're going to experience is just a lot of friction. Went down, heck, the internet's out. I've gotten a way to, get a report that this device is offline. It happened in a crucial moment. So therefore, tech sucks. Like, just get somebody back in the home. And because of how ubiquitous those type of devices are for a consumer market, I think hurts a bit of the idea of this, because people don't trust it. They're scared that it's not going to work in the time they need it to, which is all true. And so I think that certainly doesn't help things. There's also, I think this is something that we come across a lot, is there's a couple of device types that people are understandably pretty weary of. And one of those would be video cameras. Nobody wants a video camera in their home. Nobody, right? And we see that there are companies out there who kind of exclusively base their offering on video cameras. And it's understandable in a certain sense, because video cameras can do a lot, right? With processing that data, you can detect motion, you can even detect face, body, right? Like you can do a lot with video cameras, and it's kind of understandable to a certain extent why you would make the choice to kind of lean into video technology. But at the end of the day, nobody wants that in their home. The state of Missouri specifically does not like cameras. Other states feel differently about them, but with the state of Missouri, you actually, if you're operating under Medicaid setup, they won't fund anything that utilizes video cameras unless specifically there is, a sign off in an individual's service plan to use that. So video cameras definitely paint, that the idea of this, and I think a lot of people have the assumption that video cameras are being used, or heck, even things like a motion sensor or an environmental sensor that looks perhaps a bit like an eyeball or something weird, right? Like that can be
Ominous.
weird. You're right. And so like really we make a very specific point, to illustrate like this is not capturing anything. We will use cameras occasionally, but typically they're outside facing. So at someone's door, so then they can pull up, our device and look like who's at the door. Those type of things, or if perhaps there's an issue with people coming by the house, just recording those things. But even then, that has to be approved. Um, and another thing is something like a bed sensor. This is something that we end up coaching a lot on too. Um, you know, you get the idea like I don't want anybody, tracking my sleep, and I don't need to know this. No one needs to be knowing that. But it's one of the most useful sensors we have in our arsenal because there's so much that you can combine that data with to gain awareness. So, for example, is the front door open? Is so and so in bed? If they're in bed and that door is open, we might have a big problem. So
Mhm.
being able to tie those pieces together, it's not so much a tracking mechanism as much as it is a data point to help tell a story with other things going on. So without breaking down those barriers and explaining those things, those are certainly some points that keep people just perhaps a bit skeptical of what these things are, and that can certainly impede adoption.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and what I'm kind of understanding is just what you said, like the you're teaching your audience, but you're also kind of instructing the market or the potential customer as well on where it can be employed, how it can be employed in order to like be effective, and it doesn't have to rely on something just like video technology as you were saying, and I feel like that is super important for people to understand because yeah, as we were talking about privacy, obviously, the kind of pervasive, technology overlords and cameras everywhere and all sorts
Yeah.
of Big Brother stuff. Yeah, it doesn't make people feel super excited about it, but I think the big lesson is that it doesn't necessarily have to rely on just that, and in fact, that may be even one of the least helpful things potentially in the entire equation. So that's
Yep.
cool. That's really that's nice to understand. As far as like other applications of this technology and the devices, sensors, all the things that kind of are the componentry of it. There's a lot of things where a lot of situations where it could apply, not just where it already has been, kind of used. At least these are things in my head where I feel like they could be super helpful understanding, like maybe that people who are dealing with home hospice, people who are dealing with like, special needs children. Certainly, there's a lot of places where this could be potentially used. Where do you see your product potentially being used in the future?
So we are in complete agreement with that statement. We we know that it can be used in a lot of other places, and we operate accordingly. I'm not going to say there's any specific plans just yet, but I will say that we construct our product and every new feature that we create for it with that specific thing in mind. Um, and that's perhaps as much as I can say on that matter.
That's totally understandable. I understand that, as you're kind of working in an industry where other people are certainly putting out, new products, reaching out to new markets, some of that has to stay under wraps. But at the same
Yes.
time, it is cool to know that this kind of thing exists. And I really hope some of the people, listening here maybe are just learning about this kind of technology and exploring for themselves. So even outside of the things that maybe you're looking at or I'm mentioning, other people are thinking of new ways it could potentially be applied to.
So
But at the end of the day, like you've employed video, the thought of kind of like IoT sensors. Is there any sort of next evolution of your product that you can speak on any level about?
um, I'll kind of say this. We hardware wise, from like a sensor standpoint, um, we've had pretty good luck with some technology choices we've made. But as we look at it, at what expansion looks like, we know that there are some pretty serious barriers, to some of the aspects of that hardware. Right now, we've been deploying all of this stuff, so we run the installs. We know this technology inside and out. But having done this now for several years, we've seen where the shortcomings are, on a lot of that hardware stuff, both from a logistical standpoint to feature standpoints to just everything. And we are pretty heavily set on solving a lot of those issues. And, I would just say keep an eye on on moves that Hearo as a company is making over the next couple of years. And yeah, we are aware that there's a lot that can be done, and we're pretty certain, that we've got some good answers to those things.
That's awesome. That is cool. I totally I respect, I understand, you can't take the wraps off too much, but I feel like there's a big gap in the marketplace. We talked, I think, the last time, you and I, just personally, about how, especially within, certainly in senior services, there's gaps in the marketplace. There's so much that can potentially be
Oh,
done that
yes.
would hopefully relieve burdens for a lot of people, whether that's the actual care providers themselves, whether that's for the actual individuals. So I'm super excited to see wherever the product kind of takes you and the company, and I'm nice to have that kind of element being explored in the marketplace, because there's quite a bit of need for it, I'm sure.
Yep.
But no matter what, is there anything else that you feel like you want the audience to know, or anybody kind of looking into Hero or like products, about the market, or anything else you feel like you want them to check out or understand about your company?
Yeah, certainly. If if anyone listening to this is familiar with the space of care provider agencies, whether you work for one, you've got family members receiving services, by one, um, definitely take a look at our website. It's hearolife.com, and that's Hearo life life.com, and you can find out some more information about the company. You can reach out and contact us. We have, given the nature of how challenging it is to grok all of this information, we actually have a trailer that we've outfitted much like a home, and it's equipped with all of our technology, and we are really invested in taking that on the road wherever that may be. I think we may be even heading out to the East Coast here, in a couple of weeks. If anybody is interested in that, certainly contact us through the site. We would be happy to get that trailer out. We feel it's one of the best ways, to truly feel this. We have online demos that we give. It's just not the same as seeing it all in person. But that'd be the biggest thing I would impart. If you feel like there might be a connection to be made here, certainly reach out to us, and we're always happy to talk.
Cool. I must say that talking to you about this, the last time and this time, really about kind of digging into your thoughts and perspectives on not only the product, the market, but actually just security, privacy, accessibility, and stuff. Is really fun, and definitely I appreciate where you're going with everything, and definitely wish you the best of luck and success with, like, the company. So seriously, I'll keep an eye on it. I certainly hope that everybody else in the audience does. But thank you so much for joining me, and yeah, and
Yeah.
talking a little bit more about Hero. I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely my pleasure. This has been fun.
Cool. Well, thank you. This has been another episode of Mix and Matchbox. I'm your host, Brent Feldman. I've been here with Myke Bates, of Hero, co-founder. And so, yeah, definitely. Thank you very much. Like, subscribe, and we'll be back with more content.